Hello, everyone. This is Daniela, the founder and the host for the Still Standing podcast, which is a part of the Still Standing Together series that includes this podcast, support groups and workshops for women, an online community of positivity, and apparel. And if you listened to episode 1, you heard that I started this a few months ago, and the podcast was designed to be a way for us to follow up with our attendees from our support groups and workshops. And this was also a way to reach out to more people to help them while they're going through any struggles or challenges in their lives. You know, it's hard for us to see the light during the struggle, and what really had helped me was talking to people, talking to therapists, talking to a mental health professional, whether it was traditional or non-traditional, meeting up with other women in my position who are maybe entrepreneurs, who are artists. For others, maybe it's mothers, maybe it's people who are transitioning in some way or another. Maybe they're moving or relocating to another city to live in. Maybe they just need a change, or, maybe it's the uncontrollable. Something has happened that we just can't prepare for. I wanted to create this community to support everybody so that they had resources and tools and go-tos and honest talk, honest conversation, honest support, and openness to make them feel as though they're not alone. It's important that whatever I do through these podcasts or through any of these resources through Still Standing, that there's a sense of togetherness and there's a sense of reliability, but there's also a sense of self-discovery. Welcome to podcast episode 12 with our guest Carolyn Hannan Bell, a licensed professional counselor and author of children's books Daddy's Disease, Mommy's Disease, Daddy's Addiction, and Mommy's Addiction. Carolyn is a practicing psychotherapist in South Jersey. She earned her BA in psychology from Duquesne University in Pittsburgh and her MS in counseling from Chestnut Hill College in Philadelphia. She often works with families and individuals suffering from the emotional effects of alcohol and substance abuse. And on this podcast episode, she'll talk to you about codependency and what to understand when working with someone with a codependency or addiction. She also works with people who suffer from depression and anxiety, as well as helping children understand through a series of books called Daddy's Disease and Mommy's Disease to help them understand alcoholism, and then Daddy's Addiction and Mommy's Addiction to help them understand parental addiction. Carolyn and I were connected through a mutual friend who felt that this would be a great topic to interview Carolyn on, because not only do we talk about codependencies, but we talk about the family dynamic and what to understand when going through your own journey of self-recovery or when working with someone who does. She also helps us to learn tools on how we get through things such as grief, which has been our recent topic lately, loss, frustration, and dynamic of family and children, and how we can help to look at patterns in life and how we can change from them. Something that really stuck out to me in our interview is about having meaning in life through a service or through helping people. So I wanted to share a quick study that shows about how helping people can help us achieve happiness. According to a study by the National Institutes of Health, when you help others, you give off positive vibes, which can rub off on your peers and improve your friendships. Both parties will contribute to maintaining a mutually beneficial dynamic, so you'll have stronger friendships. And according to the Mental Health Foundation, face-to-face activities such as volunteering at a drop-in center can help reduce loneliness and isolation, and can help people create a feeling of community and a sense of belonging. And according to the United Health Group, 78% of people who volunteered over a 12-month period said that they felt that their charitable activities lowered their stress. They were also more calm and peaceful than people who didn't participate in volunteer work. So just these examples can really help give us perspective And it was something that stood out for me during my interview with Carolyn because she talks about her own practices in psychology and counseling others, and through her ventures, such as being an author and all types of other things, and through the benefits of social support and communication, we can help to find hope on a daily basis. Please listen in on Carolyn's amazing wisdom on how to adjust to change during recovery and healing, and how to live a life that makes sense to us. Hi, Carolyn. Thank you so much for being on the Still Standing podcast.
Hi, Daniela. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, I'm so glad, and I'm really happy that our mutual friend Cheryl was able to connect us because I love what you are doing.
Yes, she is an awesome people connector.
So I'm really happy about that, and I love that you're going to be able to, share your wisdom with our community on a lot of different topics. But let's just kind of get started and tell us about yourself and what you do.
I am a licensed professional counselor, which means I have a master's degree in counseling, and I've been in private practice for about 20 years. Actually started with my mother, who was a psychologist, and we shared a practice for many years. And so that's what I do. And I work with people, all different issues, and mostly adults. Some family issues, a lot of depression and anxiety, and I also wrote 4 books in a series that I call Helping Children Understand. And in that series is Daddy's Disease, Mommy's Disease, which are helping children understand alcoholism, and Dad's Addiction and Mom's Addiction, which helps kids understand parental addiction. So that is, the 2-second version of, the last 3 decades.
That was wonderful. I'm very impressed, actually, because that's not easy to do. You deal with a lot of sensitive and serious cases. Did you specialize in these things, or you found people were drawn to you about that?
I am not a drug and alcohol counselor, so I don't specialize in that, but I do specialize in codependency, which, we're all a little bit codependent, and some of us, myself included, are a lot codependent. And a lot of that kind of behavior can come from being in relationships or around certain addictions, even, people who have mood addictions kind of problems. But I definitely have alcoholism in my family and extended family, and in my clientele as well. So that definitely gave me a lot of interest and sympathy, empathy, and desire to make a difference somehow for so many families struggling with this.
Wow, no, that's incredible. And I wanted to ask you is, what was your experience in mental health to get you to this career? Do you think that had a lot to do with it?
Definitely. Yeah, I certainly didn't have the best mental health growing up. I don't think maybe many of us did. My father committed suicide when I was 13, and that kind of sent me on a whirling dervish of a journey through adolescence. And I learned a lot, and I went through a lot, and I kind of came out the other end thinking, the only way that all of this will be productive and have meaning and have some sort of service is if I use this to help other people. It also didn't hurt that my mother was a psychologist at the time. So the idea was planted in my head that, oh, this career definitely exists and is something that I could do. So that's how it happened. Although I didn't I got my bachelor's degree when I was young, but I worked as a musician until I was well into my 30s, and that's when I went back to school for my master's degree in counseling.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing that because that's not something easy, and to share. And that's something that, with Still Standing Together, I appreciate that, because I know there are others out there who can relate to a situation like that happening as they were an adolescent. So just thank you for sharing that.
Oh, but it's my pleasure, and it was, I think that that's something that we all need to do more often. And it took me many, many years to be able to share without feelings of shame or fear of stigma or just discomfort of people knowing, something so intimate. But I feel so strongly that if we don't share our difficulties and our strengths and how we get through things, then we're not going to grow as a civilization. And so it's kind of in that, I'm like, feel like I should have a flag or something, but I'm not really giving great kudos to myself. It's scary and hard to be vulnerable in what you went through, but I think we have to, for each other.
Exactly. I agree. And do you remember, Carolyn, like when that shift happened where you realized I need to be sharing this?
Um, Probably maybe my early 20s. It started out, I would share it kind of in the form of music. I would write songs and really bad poetry to try and express and share. And that wasn't obviously reaching any kind of a wide audience. So I don't know. I also needed to have a job, and I thought that this would be a way to intertwine all of these wishes.
I love how it all came full circle for you. So you said you've been in private practice for 20 years.
Yes,
So what types of work do you do? What do you offer? Why would somebody come to you, and what would they expect?
definitely the relationship between the counselor and the client is the most important thing. So if somebody were looking for a very casual, relaxed atmosphere, that would be me. I'm very direct. I'm very interactive, and I use dogs. My dogs often sit in on therapy in my home office. Um, I work with a lot of people who have issues with, like I said, codependency, depression, and anxiety. And so we work a lot on looking at patterns in life that have worked, that haven't worked, and how to look at our thinking and what we've been through and how we can make changes in ourselves so that we can have a life that is empowered and of our own making.
I love that. And I'm happy that you said you have a dog that's sometimes there, because I think we briefly touched on the fact that I started Still Standing Together because I suffer from anxiety and depression, and I just couldn't bear the thought of people not having a support system like I do. And so I wanted to help that grow. But one of the things I did do recently is I got a pet, and I have a cat, and her name is Jolene, and it really makes a world of difference to have an animal around. I've noticed.
Oh, absolutely. They are the best therapists. They are, unconditional, positive regard as long as you feed them. And it just gives you such a sense of peace and serenity and great cuddling.
Yes, great. I love that. Absolutely great cuddling. So now, do you have any other suggestions for those out there healing, how they can help stay on that journey of self recovery?
Well, definitely, if you are dealing with an alcoholic or an addict in your life, I recommend Al-Anon or Nar-Anon 100%. It is a wonderful program that helps you to recover from the behaviors that you've learned in order to deal with the kind of difficult behaviors around you. If you are having problems with addiction yourself, then AA or NA, they're just invaluable 12-step programs. I know a lot of people have trouble with what they think is a kind of religious aspect of those groups, but I have personally found, I did go to Al Anon myself, and I'm not a religious person, I hope that doesn't turn people off, but I'm spiritual, not religious. And so I had some difficulty in the beginning because these groups talk about a higher power and giving it over to God and that sort of a thing. But if you look at what these 12-step programs refer to as God, as even your gut, your inner navigator, your whatever it is that guides you, I think that, you can overcome the religious piece, which, as I said, I think that's where I have found that most people have trouble going to these groups because they say, I'm not religious, that won't work for me. So that's my 2 cents on that one. I also think that, finding a good counselor is paramount, just to have somebody to be objective, but also connected, who can guide you through things and help you see things and, I don't know, see things in a way that you wouldn't be able to help you on your journey.
Yeah, it's great to hear you say that there are programs, but then also the combination of also having the counselor, because that mentorship, or whatever anyone's going through. But I know for myself, I know I need that mentorship on a consistent basis to
Mm-hmm.
keep me on track of whatever it is I'm going through at that time. So, you know, I don't know too much about codependencies. And haven't had to deal with it in my life right now, but I love hearing you say that there are programs and that you want to seek a counselor. So I want to get into your book soon, but while we're still talking about this, because I think it has a big thing to do with um, what you've put out there with your books. What can you say for those who are, living with somebody else or has somebody in their life that is facing recovery or going through an addiction?
You mean how to help themselves while they're dealing with this?
Yeah, yes, how to help themselves. Any tips you can offer that would help what they're going through as well.
It's really all about learning how to control what is within yours to control. I think when we're living with addiction or alcoholism, our first instinct is to try to control the person who's drinking or using by counting their drinks or giving them dirty looks or whatever it is. We can become very controlling of another person's behavior, which in turn makes us out of control of our own behavior because you really can't focus on two people's behavior at once. So we're definitely not looking at our own. So we can become, kind of crazy, controlling, nagging banshees when what we're really doing is not focusing on, okay, what is okay for me? What do I need to do for me? How do I handle this situation? Take yourself out of the situation, whether that means don't be around that person when they're not in a good way, or to completely remove yourself from the situation, or whatever you can figure out that's within your control.
Okay, that's great. No, I love that. That's great advice too. And I'm just curious to know, do you have any communication methods that you suggest if you're unable to get yourself, if you're unable to remove yourself from the situation?
Communication with the other person.
Yes.
I think that setting firm boundaries, and all of this is really hard. I know I can put out information and it sounds like, oh, just do this, just do that. All of it is really hard to do because you're essentially building a new behavior muscle, and it takes many, many, many times in practice to build the muscle, just like, a bicep. It's not really different. So setting boundaries looks something like, I know that I have no control over your drinking, but I don't like to be around you when you're drinking, so I'm not going to be. So just know that if you choose to drink, I will not be there. Something like that.
Which
Rather than saying to the person, you can't drink anymore, because that doesn't work. You can't enforce that. You can enforce, I'm not going to be around it.
that makes total sense, and it sounds like it's taking you back to expressing how you feel And back to what you said about the control thing, you can only control yourself.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. It's hard because it seems to be like the last choice on our list of things to do, control myself, right?
absolutely, I can relate to that too.
Yeah, me too, of course.
Well, so let's get into a bit more about what you've put out there. So you help people through counseling, but then you also have these great books that you have. Tell me about the books and how that started.
Oh, the first book was Daddy's Disease, and it started because I had a client, and he was in recovery for many years, but he had a young daughter, and he was in the middle of a divorce situation, and he was afraid that he didn't understand or know how to express to his daughter what his alcoholism was about. And he looked for a lot of different books and just didn't find anything he liked. So he challenged me to write a book because we had spoken about it a lot. And I mean, I like to write, and I thought, well, that's a great project, and I've been challenged. So that's how it started. And it was a really fun project. I enjoyed it thoroughly. My dogs got to participate in all of them because they're all represented in the books, of course. And so that was the beginning. And then after that, I wrote Mommy's Disease, and just trying to make it accessible to boys and girls, whatever is going to appeal to as many people as possible. So I think it's really hard to talk to children about anything that's going on with a parent that is kind of frightening even to the adults. But children definitely know everything that's going on. If we're not talking to them about what's going on, they're going to make up their own interpretations about what they see. And those interpretations 100% of the time are going to be wrong. And they're probably going to be something like, what did I do to cause this? Because a child's world is only as big as that child. So everything in his world is going to be caused by him. So that's what that is really the message in these books is it's really not about the parent and the disease. It's about how to help the child understand and not take personally what's going on in their families so that they can grow up into healthy, functioning adults who really don't need people like me.
That was my next question to you are is it common for children to take this with them as they get into adulthood?
Absolutely. Yeah, it never doesn't happen. There's a group called Adult Children of Alcoholics. There are certain behaviors that are similar for a lot of people who grow up in a home with alcoholism or addiction. Codependency definitely emerges from that sort of situation because you grow up feeling like you caused behaviors and therefore you can cause behaviors. So your outlook on life becomes, okay, focus on everybody else's behavior and what do I need to do to change their behavior into something peaceful and serene that I can live with. So it kind of very often causes you to I look at codependency as a focus disorder. I'm focused on everybody else around me and what I think they need to be okay so that I can be okay.
Wow, it's all so interesting.
Yeah, it's a pretty awful communication, not or behavioral way because it's cockeyed. Then we're not at all focusing on what do I need? What's right for me? How do I make the right decisions when I'm not even thinking about me?
Right, right. So now, do you have a particular message or maybe some sort of coping tool that you include in the books that you think would be beneficial for our listeners to hear about so they have an idea of what to expect for their children?
The coping tool is really talking. I use a lot of analogies in the book that kids can understand, um, so that they can understand addiction and how it has nothing to do with them. For instance, I liken the disease of alcoholism to chickenpox. In the story, the little boy or girl has a best friend in school who isn't able to go to school because they have the chicken pox, and that's a way for the parent in the story to discuss how, was it anybody's fault that this child got the chicken pox? Did it, make you feel bad about yourself that this person got the chicken pox? And how, likening that to alcoholism, it's, completely has nothing to do with you. You just have to live your life around it. So I definitely, I think analogies are fantastic tools for mental health because it's a way for us to be able to understand something theoretical and complicated in a really grounded way, like chickenpox.
Right. And that's something that kids can relate to because that's what's happening in their life, in
Yes.
classrooms, things like that. Now, you raise a good point. It makes me think of a tool that I use that one of the therapists that I've spoken to has shared with me is, how accurate is whatever it is going on in your life. Is that something that could be applied, or is that a little too advanced maybe for children?
No, not at all. I think that's a great tool, and I like to use that. I do it kind of in a courtroom sort of, like imagine a Law and Order, which you wouldn't really be able to use with kids, but um, thinking that if you were a lawyer and you had to submit evidence to the court, and it had to be absolutely factual, not hearsay, not made up, just completely factual, that's what you could submit to the judge. I say, well, that's what you're allowed to submit to your mind in terms of deciding what you're going to react to. So I think you could do a version of that with kids, like provable facts. Like, okay, if you had to look that up, I almost said encyclopedia, which definitely tells you my age. But if you had to Google that, would it come up as a fact that you think, daddy doesn't love me anymore, or something like that? Where is that written? Where could you find that? How is that a fact? If it's not a fact, then you're telling yourself a story. And if it's a story, you're making something up and then feeling a certain way based on what you've just made up.
Carolyn, I just love the way that you use these analogies and make it so much more relatable for children. But I've got to be honest, as an adult, it actually helps me as well to think of it that way too. I just love how you're putting it out there that way. So now, with these books, have you seen any influence or anyone tell you that it was really helpful, and why?
Yeah, I've gotten some messages back from people saying that it really opened up communication with their child, or it really helped even them. I've gotten messages from adults saying, like, this book helped me explain to my adult family what it's like to be me, which was really interesting. I didn't expect that response, but it definitely, a lot of the reactions have been that it's helped to start communication. And that's exactly what the book is supposed to be. Because it's going to be, you're not going to read the book and all of a sudden, oh, okay, I get this, I'm changed. This is going to be, a conversation throughout a lifetime to understand, just like we try to understand our family dynamics for the rest of our lives. This is a big head start.
Absolutely. Oh, I love it. It's a key piece is what it sounds like, that communication factor.
Yeah. Yeah. Without communication, if a child doesn't feel safe to go to a parent and the parent doesn't know how to respond, then, like I said before, the child's just going to invent his own ideas and explanations for things, and they're going to be pretty fantastical.
Wow. Now, do you have any anything more to share with that in terms of children, aside from opening the communication using the analogies, but something that maybe you personally used when you were younger or as you've gotten older that was able to help you heal and move past the challenge or the struggle of that loved one having the codependency?
I read almost constantly. I think there's so many great books out there. I mean, I read for pleasure constantly. I don't do self-help books constantly, but I do them a lot. And I think there are a lot of really incredibly helpful ones out there. So I think it's, if you're not in therapy yourself, I think it's good to always be trying to learn new ways of thinking about things, or at least listening to other people's stories that are similar to your own, so that you always are continuing to grow and kind of be aware that, hey, I have these things to work on. Much like in AA, they say, like, you need to always be aware, even, that you're in recovery, because otherwise you're going to get kind of cavalier about it and you could fall off the wagon. I think we're the same way with our mental health, that if we're not always working on it, then we're going to not be working on it. And that never goes well. I also think that having a passion is really, really key in as a form of therapy. Like for me, it's always been music. I play guitar and sing, and I've been doing that since I was a little kid, and that is such a release for me, and just a place to go in a zone that I'm not thinking about anything but the music. So I really think people need that, even if it's video games, or there's art, there's writing, there's reading, there's horseback riding, there's whatever works for you. Fishing, doesn't matter.
I'm really glad that you brought that up about the passion thing, because it ties in so well. I've had so many conversations with people who about their mental health who have said, I feel better, and I constantly, I'm a big advocate for it, and I know from my own experience that I've had times where I felt really good, and there were times when I stopped doing all of the things that helped me to feel really good in terms of
Hmm.
my holistic health, my all my tools to cope with any type of worry or anxiousness, things like that. And now what I've realized after going through these cycles is that I can only, again, for myself, get to where I can pursue my passions as long as I am constantly working on my mental health.
That's so true, isn't it? It's, when we're the kind of the lowest that we get, that's when it's hardest to use our tools, and that's when we need them the most.
Right, absolutely. So I'm glad that you brought that up because it really was a conversation that I keep finding, particularly this week, I keep finding myself having this conversation that, you know, from I can only speak on myself, and for me personally, from morning until night, I'm working on it in some way. And that's what I feel keeps me on track to then do the things that make me happy. So now you mentioned about also, you know, getting together like AA groups, different types of support groups, and listening to others to grow, which is an amazing thought. That we need each other and hearing each other out. And again, that communication piece helps us to grow. So, what are your thoughts, and how can you help us to understand how the support groups really help to push us further in a healthier, happier direction?
I think the first thing that they do is they start to take off the stigma and the shame for what we're going through. And we start to see that, wow, there are other people who are having the exact same or similar issues that I'm having. And I'm not all alone floating out here on this raft in an ocean full of sharks. There are other people here. And the more we take the stigma and the shame off not having these, Facebook perfect lives, then we get to see what real life really looks like, and we kind of, I don't know, what it normalize for people that having difficulty with your mental health is normal, and that we can talk about it and that we can help each other, and then maybe there will be more help available, and maybe the systems that need to be in place will start to be in place, because it will be seen as we all have dental care. Everybody goes twice a year to get your teeth cleaned, and nobody thinks twice about that. Mental health care shouldn't be less than that.
I absolutely agree. It's a mission. We've got to get that out so people know the importance of it should be as important as all the physical appointments and checkups that we do. So now, since we
Hmm.
are talking though a little bit more about how we feel and things like that, can you explain the like psychological aspect of it? What's going on in our brains, in our bodies when addiction has, you know, surfaced?
For the alcoholic or for the
That's a good
addict?
question. I was just thinking.
Yeah.
Let's touch on the addict first.
Um, well, I can only tell you secondhand. I'm not an addict or, someone suffering from substance abuse disorder. So I can't speak firsthand. I can only tell you what I've been made to understand from clients, and that it is such a physiological, completely overtaking it's like having a demon inside you that just overtakes everything. It's the kind of like you're not even there anymore. um, Not like you're demonic in personality, I just mean that you're just not yourself. I use this analogy a lot of times to understand it myself and to help other people, I think, understand it. Is that, I mean, most of us have been on a diet from time to time in our lives, or really wanted to lose weight and known the difficulty of just make it through a day without eating this or that or the other thing. How hard is that? And how often have we just plumb failed? Even though we tell ourselves, oh my God, I would be so much happier if I just weighed 10 pounds less, blah, blah, blah. But we can't do it. We can't make it through that day. And that's not different, I think, than what it's like to be in recovery.
Yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense. I love your analogies because it really is real life situations that help us. And you mentioned about helping to understand. That's exactly why I'm asking you. These are kind of, I feel like I'm kind of throwing you some curveballs, but I want everyone who's listening to understand whether they're going through it themselves, that this is a tough thing that they're going through, but then also anyone who's listening that has loved ones or friends or anyone who they are alongside with going through it, that like you said earlier, they're not trying to control them, but they're really understanding the struggle that they have to go through on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so important to understand that these people aren't doing any of these behaviors to hurt anybody, or to, it may seem so, and some of the behaviors may be hurtful, but they're not done to hurt. They just are. I mean, it ends up hurting somebody. But any more than, when we can't make it through the day without the chocolate chip cookie, we're not doing that to disappoint anybody. It's not about anybody else. And that's, I think that we feel so much that having addiction or alcoholism in our family and how much we're affected by that it kind of gives us, we'll just rail against that person and make them change their behavior because we're taking it personally.
Right. Now, would you say, am I correct in saying that most of the time, and I'm generalizing, I know there's exceptions, but there are deeply rooted uh, feelings that need to be worked out. I'm not sure if I know the correct like terminology to say for this, but with those who are facing addiction or codependency or substance abuse, do you find that there's a deeper rooted issue going on?
There is usually depression and anxiety, social anxiety. There is often that. Sometimes it just, with addiction, it can happen after, some surgery and getting on pain pills that it just goes south. But a lot of the time, it begins as a way to self-medicate. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right that there are many times where there's untreated, unmedicated depression, anxiety, PTSD, that sort of thing.
And now from a perspective of not the person with the addiction, but somebody, a loved one, caring for them, or somebody in their circle. Do you feel there's some element of grief that happens? And I ask you this, Carolyn, because we have a support group and workshop coming up soon that is about like grief or loss, and what you might be feeling, and how you can help cope, how you can help yourself cope, or why these things might be happening. So is there any sense of grief that happens while the loved one is, you know, bearing witness to someone with addiction?
Oh, tremendous, tremendous grief. It's the grief of the loss of a dream that you had of a life with this person, or you know, or your hopes for that person. I think that, yeah, there's definitely a grief of what we wanted things to turn out like. Yes, grief is definitely a part. And I think for the person struggling with alcoholism or addiction as well, I mean, they are deeply grieved, ashamed, they're depressed. It's all there.
Wow, it
Yes.
breaks my heart to hear that, because it, it's just so layered. It seems like there's so many layers to have to peel off to find that happiness or that peace. And my heart breaks for both sides who are going through this. Um, so, in that sense, do you have any suggestions or anything that you advise people to turn to when they want to try to find more hope? I know you mentioned some things earlier, but just things they can do on a daily basis that might help them to again find that hope or stay consistent with their recovery.
I think it boils down to the simple day-to-day things that we can do to feel in control of ourselves and feel like we are maybe making somewhat of a positive difference in a world where we can often feel helpless or hopeless. And that can look like just, kind of going out in the world and smiling at the cashier, or, not flipping off the driver next to you, or, pushing someone's shopping cart into the kiosk for them. Just trying to be your best self in the world rather than focusing on how everybody else needs to be their best self. If we just show up saying, I'm just going to be the best version of me that I can be, even if that means I'm going to drag myself out of bed today, that's that's what we
Oh,
do.
Carolyn, I love that advice. I love that. And when you said, just smiling at someone, you made me smile, and I didn't even get to. So it is those little bits that really can make an impact. So I'm really glad that you chose to share that with us, because it's that, um, it's being our best version of ourselves. And that's so important. I
Yeah.
think that's what we're all trying to get to, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think it's important also to understand that sometimes our best version of ourselves is not as stellar as our other best versions, but it's still our best version. And I think we should feel good about whatever our best version is at the moment.
Oh, yeah. And that sounds like, in a sense, it almost sounds like the idea of listening to your body, listening to how you're feeling that day. Do you agree?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. And I love that, you're holistic and you focus on body, mind, and spirit, because I think that is, with any mental illness, of course, it's a physiological condition. So nutrition and exercise and taking care of our spirit, however you do that, is paramount. But exercise and nutrition, huge.
It's interesting you said that, because at a time when I was very low, I couldn't, and I couldn't get myself to go do anything that was related to fitness, which is my happy place. You mentioned earlier, you enjoy music and writing, and for me, it's going to take a class or going to out for a walk, and I couldn't get myself there until I started to see my therapist, and she was saying to me, you got to get, same thing, you got to get out there, your nutrition, your physical fitness, it's still important, and that's going to help you with what's happening mentally, or with your anxiety and depression. So I'm glad you brought that up, because it's so important, I feel like.
Sounds like you have a great therapist. That's awesome. Yes.
That's what she's saying. She's wonderful, but you're all wonderful. And it's great to hear so many different perspectives. This is actually the first time we've done a podcast where we focused on something as as serious or as sensitive and real. This is really happening with people, based on addiction, and everyone who is experiencing it, the addict, the family, friends, things like that. So it's just so wonderful to hear another therapist's opinion. And I feel like the more and more we can hear these things, in all different ways, we're ultimately again getting that goal of happiness, peace, and trying to live our lives the best way we can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and taking care of each other in this crazy world we're living in right now.
Exactly. So now, we talk a lot about resiliency, and what can we do to get back to these places. So and I like that you brought it up earlier about the muscle, because one of the questions I wanted to ask you is, how do we strengthen that resiliency muscle, but specifically when we have to adjust to change, how can we really jump into keeping how can we jump into keeping ourselves on track of this recovery, of this self-healing, when change is thrown our way that could take us off course?
It's so interesting that you bring up change, because I was talking with my husband this morning, and we were talking about change and how often people are, they say, I don't like change, I'm so afraid of change. But the fact of the matter is that change happens like every minute of our lives, and always has and always will. So the fact of the matter is we all do change really well because we do it constantly. So I think if we look at the stories that we're telling ourselves, like, wow, change is scary, is that actually true? It's another one of those court admissible things. Is it actually true that it's scary, or am I just telling myself that? And then I think that one tool that I use for myself very often is, I think, okay, what would I tell a friend to do in this situation? And then I know exactly what to do, or how to think, or how to handle it. And then I try really hard to make myself do that thing, which is usually difficult for me, but I know it's the right thing because it's what I would tell somebody else.
I feel like we've covered so much, and I'm hoping that our listeners feel a new understanding of what people are going through with codependency, how we can help ourselves heal, how we can help them heal. So now, a little bit more about your efforts in helping this. Do you have a particular mission, or something, what you'd love to see your work bring to the world?
I guess my particular passion in working in counseling is helping people to overcome codependency. I think probably because that's the thing I've struggled with most myself, and what I see most out there in the world that causes so many relationship problems all over the place. And in recovery, we're truly empowered to live a life that makes sense to ourselves and is just much more on track and centered. So I would say, because it's my own personal mission, it is my mission to help other people with. That sounds pretty
No,
narcissistic.
no, I actually it makes complete sense because it ties into, we do need to take care of ourselves. And it's funny that you joke about that because I have I'm a speaker coming up soon, and I have to speak to young teenagers, and I'm thinking to myself, how do I get this message across of like, you need to, you've got to take care of yourself first, but also like they're still learning. So, it also be kind to people, so, so I know what you're saying. And it's funny that you joke that way, but it doesn't come off that way because it makes total sense that if you want to, you've got to take care of yourself and live that life, as you said, that makes sense to us.
I talk a lot to people about the difference between being self-full, which I think I made up that word, but between being self-full and being selfish. Being self-full is being a responsible human being and taking care of yourself so that nobody else has to. Being selfish is taking the biggest piece of chocolate cake. Nobody wants to be that
And I
person.
do love chocolate, but I don't. That is wonderful, and I'm glad you made up that word "full" because it makes sense again. So that's a great way to look at it. Thank you, because that will help me now when I speak. And you mentioned about earlier your passion, and then having making sure others have their passion. Do you feel that this will help bring them more positive emotions into their daily life?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because it gives you purpose. It gives you something to look forward to. It even kind of gives your life a theme. I mean, even if somebody just decides, like, I think I want to collect antique buttons and make them into collages. I don't know where that came from. But then all of a sudden, they can go to antique shops or vintage shops or garage sales. All of a sudden, they have like things to do and something to look forward to.
Oh, I love it. That's such great advice. I'm really glad we talked about some heavy things, and I'm glad that, as we're coming to an end, it's a little bit more lighter and people can find that, there can be happiness through all of this. And it starts with understanding ourselves, understanding the codependency and what others might be going through, and, helping each other together get through it.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yes.
and with that said, it ties us into my final questions for you, which is, still standing is our organization still standing together. And the idea is that we are trying to bring people together that are going through similar situations, whether it's current or it's happened to them in the past, or, any type of challenge they're facing. But I do always like to ask our podcast guests, what does still standing mean to you?
It means I've got this. It means I believe in me. It means I've gotten through everything that I've had to get through so far, and I can trust me above and beyond anybody else that has ever been or will ever be in my life, because I've always been there and I've always done it.